Every family has secrets, but some secrets don't just shatter trust, they shatter everything. When the Browns, who were already living with the burden of polygamy, believed they had endured every storm, a secret arose that nobody could have anticipated. A secret that started not with fury, but with whispers. "If he loved us so much, he would not need anyone else," said one wife softly, looking down at her clasped hands. Another whispered to her, "Or perhaps he already has someone." And that's when everything started. The man they relied on, the man who promised to keep them all safe, held within him a secret so burdensome that it could disunite the family into shreds. For years he had kept hidden a fifth wife, not a stranger, but one whom he loved with all his heart. Imagine discovering that the man you've built your life with had already promised his heart to another. Not in theory, not in dreams, but in reality. A second marriage, a hidden relationship, and years of deception. This wasn't just betrayal, this was war inside a family that was supposed to stand together. But here's the surprise. Rather than fight, the wives came together. And what ensued wasn't merely yelling, weeping, or accusations. It was an unraveling, a gradual, consummate descent that culminated in one unforgettable night. Stick with me, because once you enter this tale, you'll know that sometimes it's the ones right next to us who leave the most indelible scars. Before we start, what would you do if you found out that your partner had a secret life the whole time? Let me know in the comments, because this tale will challenge every assumption you have about love, loyalty, and betrayal. And believe me, what follows is even more astounding than the revelation itself. It all started on a very ordinary-looking evening from the outside, but inside that living room, nothing was ordinary anymore. The family sat together, the wives in a row across the couch, the husband in his favorite chair, fidgeting. No one said anything initially. The quiet hung so heavy it seemed to have a presence, burrowing through the space, choking each gasp. Both wives regarded the other, waiting, challenging someone to break the silence. And then quietly it broke. "Who is she?" one wife inquired. Only 3 words, but they fell like thunder. The husband stiffened, his eyes flitting down towards the ground. He attempted to brush it off with a laugh, shaking his head like the question was absurd. But his laugh faltered halfway through, giving away his tell. And in that infinitesimal moment of vulnerability, the truth started to seep out. The wives weren't questioning blindly. They had witnessed things: a carelessly left phone on the kitchen counter, messages scribbled in the wee hours of the morning, photographs that belonged nowhere, whispers that clung to him everywhere he went, whenever he believed no one was paying attention. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. He finally met their eyes, his own dark and exhausted, and spoke. "It's not what you think. But it always is, isn't it?" What came next wasn't an outburst of shouting. No, it was worse. It was silence, a silence that was packed with rage much deeper than a scream. The wives remained motionless, their faces clenched, their eyes piercing. Together they knew in this moment. This was more than a mistake. This was betrayal, carefully built up over years of deceit. One of them leaned forward and told him, "If you've been keeping her hidden, if you've been leading a life we don't know, then you've already made a decision." That statement sliced him open, because she was correct. He had made a decision, and soon enough, the truth would be dragged out into the light, no matter how hard he tried to keep it buried. He changed his position, fumbling for words, but the silence suffocated him. At last he spoke in a whisper. "I love her." The room came apart. Gasps, a hand over a mouth, a tear falling without consent. Love? That was the term he used? Not a mistake, not a fling, but love. That word ringing in the air, ricocheting off walls like a curse. Because if it was love, then everything else, every promise, every vow, suddenly counted for nothing. The wives, who were once rivals in their own messy equation, were suddenly allies. Betrayal has a way of bonding the broken, and they were all broken together at that moment. One wife spat out between gritted teeth. "So where is she? Where's this woman you love so much?" He stood there, trembling as he folded his hands. "She exists. And she's been in my life longer than you'll ever know. I married her." Married her. 2 words that tore the room apart like an earthquake. The wives exploded, not in a frenzy, but in raw, contained anger. Their voices were interwoven, harsh, cutting, demanding. How long? Why? Where? Each question pierced like a dart, and each time he replied, he sank further. One wife walked, pacing back and forth across the room, hands fisted in her hair. Another was muttering to herself, almost as if praying, how could he do this? And then the truth seeped out in pieces. Secret journeys, secret phone calls, vanishing money, years of deception piled upon years, each block carefully laid until it constructed a wall that none of them were expecting. The husband attempted to explain, claiming he had reasons, that he was shielding them from further hurt. But the explanations rang hollow, because nothing could shield them from this. And here's when things changed. Rather than turning against each other, the wives bonded. For the first time in years, they weren't competing for his attention. They were commiserating. Each saw the same pain mirrored back in the other. That solidarity frightened him more than anything else. One wife stepped forward, her voice firm and icy. Bring her here, we want to see her. If she's really your wife, then she needs to be here. No more secrets. The ultimatum weighed in the air, and for the first time, the husband's mask slipped entirely. His face went white, his lips quivered. He knew that this was more than about bringing in a new wife. This was about losing control. For if he took her in, everything would be different forever. And that's when he abruptly got up, his chair scraping the floor. His voice, once placid, now broke out in desperation. You don't understand. I can't, not yet. But it was too late. The wives knew perfectly well. They had already witnessed enough, heard enough, sensed enough. And they were aware. Whatever next happened would not only try their marriage, but the very existence of being a family. The evening ended without a conclusion. Just silence once more. The sort that does not dissipate, but accumulates with each passing second. Each of the wives stayed awake in her bedroom, the same question seething through her mind. Who is she? And tomorrow would they catch sight of the woman who destroyed everything? The next morning did not start with sunlight. It started with tension. All the wives walked through the house with leaden feet, the air heavy with unspoken words. Coffee cups clanked against the table, but no one enjoyed a sip. Their thoughts were elsewhere altogether, lost in the echo of his admission, I love her. I married her. He lingered in the bedroom longer than normal, keeping his eyes averted from their gaze. And when he finally left, his skin was colorless, his hair not brushed, as if the burden of his deception had robbed him of even the most minute luxuries. He didn't seem like a man who was in control any longer. He seemed like a man trapped. One wife spoke up first. You can't hide her anymore. Her voice was deep even, but authoritative. Another chimed in promptly. If she is indeed your wife, she needs to come through that door today. He shifted restlessly, holding onto the back of a chair as if it could restrain him. It's not that easy, he growled, but the words lacked power. They were more akin to excuses than to reasons. The wives didn't fight with each other. Not this time. They nodded in tandem, nearly in unison, as if they had agreed in silence on the same reality. If he said no, they would go get her themselves, and perhaps that was the part that frightened him most. He stroked a hand over his face and groaned, the sound of an unraveling man. She doesn't deserve your wrath. He whispered, she only wanted me, not this mess. That hurt. Not because it was mean-spirited, but because it showed his heart. He wasn't guarding them anymore. He was guarding her. The wives sat back, narrowing their eyes. One of them leaned forward, her voice cracking. So what are we then? Just pieces in your game? Did you ever love us? Or was it always her? The husband didn't reply. And sometimes the most vocal confession is the silence. Finally, he stood, pacing back and forth in the room. She's not ready to see you, he said, his voice almost pleading. She's scared of what you'll do. But the wives weren't swayed. If anything, they became closer, as a bond forged by betrayal became stronger than one forged by years of common marriage. They looked at each other, unspoken vows etched in their gazes. If he wouldn't take her, they would wrestle the truth out themselves. And that's when one wife reached for her phone. I already know her name, she said softly. I've read the messages. I know where she lives. The room came to a standstill. The husband's head jerked up, his eyes wide with terror. No, don't you dare, he snapped. But his rage had more of a tremble behind it than a command. Another wife folded her arms. You've kept your secrets long enough. Tonight we view her, one way or another. He attempted to protest, his words tripping over one another, but the wives no longer paid attention. For the first time, he wasn't in charge. They were. The hours crept by, each one more oppressive than the last. The wives murmured to one another, assembling pieces of his deceptions, anticipating the showdown that would rewrite everything. The house seemed to wait in suspended animation, anticipating the moment when silence would shatter. And when the evening finally came, he made the call. His voice shook, his hands trembling as he held the phone to his ear. They couldn't make out the words, but they heard him, the look on his face, the dread, the fear, the resignation. Slowly, he hung up and spoke only one sentence: "She's coming." The wives didn't cheer, they didn't weep, they just sat in icy silence, aware that the war was about to walk through the front door. As night fell, the home became a war zone with no guns. All the wives steeled themselves, not only for the sight of the lady, but for the truth she embodied. Decades of deception, decades of competition, decades of sacrifice. All would now be measured against a stranger who possessed their husband's heart. Minutes turned into hours. Each car that drove by outside caused them to sit up straighter, their breaths held, and then, at last, headlights turned into the driveway. The husband stood up briskly, his pale and nervous face. The wives, however, didn't budge. They remained seated, waiting, together, prepared to encounter whatever came in. The sound of a car door shutting outside echoed like a drumbeat. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. The doorknob turned slowly, and the room went still. The door opened, and there she was. The fifth wife. Dressed simply, her face calm, her eyes steady. She didn't look like someone ashamed. She didn't even look afraid. She looked like someone who believed she belonged there. Her husband hurried to her side, his arm brushing hers. A touch of intimacy so casual it shattered the wives' hearts all over again. No one said anything. Not her, not him, not them. The silence hung, heavy and agonizing, until finally one wife whispered the words that set the tone for everything that was to happen. "So this is the woman you risked everything for." The fifth wife smiled weakly. Not a smug smile, but a certain one. And that one smile revealed all the wives needed to know. This wasn't just a visitor. This was a war. The second she walked into the room, something changed. It wasn't the type of tension you could cut with a knife. It was more substantial than that. It was the type of tension that made your chest feel heavy, your hands shake, and your heart race even when you remained perfectly still. The fifth wife was there, her gaze scanning the room, locking eyes with each wife in turn. She did not blink. She did not shatter. She regarded them not as strangers, nor even as competitors, but as individuals she had already come to accept as her reality. And perhaps that was the hardest part of all. The husband attempted to speak first. This is my wife," he stuttered. His voice broke, and he immediately looked away at the floor. But the women in front of him no longer looked at him. They were focusing on her. One of the wives slouched forward, her fingers clenching her knees, her tone harsh but under control. "Do you know what you've done? Do you have any concept of what you've stolen from us?" The fifth wife didn't blink. She moved deeper into the room, her tone gentle but unbroken. "I didn't steal him. He found me. He chose me." Those words sting worse than a scream. The room exploded with gasps, murmurs, and an abrupt outpouring of raw rage. One wife stood up, pointing at the husband. "And you let us live in lies? Years? You smiled in our faces while creating a life with her behind our backs?" He attempted to justify himself, but every sentence fell apart the moment he uttered it. "I did not intend to hurt you. I thought..." "You thought what?" Another wife interrupted, her eyes blazing with anger. "That we would never discover it? That our devotion was nothing in comparison to your happy secret?" The fifth wife put her hand on his arm, attempting to steady him. That simple action, so intimate, so unconscious, unraveled one wife. She pounded her fist on the armrest of the couch, her voice shaking with fury. "You don't get to touch him like that in front of us. You don't get to act like you belong here." The husband lost it, his expression contorting with anger. "Stop it. She does belong here. She's my wife whether you like it or not." The wives remained still for a moment, stunned not by what he said, but by the venom in which it was said. He had picked sides and it wasn't theirs. And then it happened. One wife, not being able to contain her rage, retorted with bitter words, cutting like glass. "You're pathetic. You wasted everything on a woman who will never grasp what we created. You don't deserve us. You don't deserve this family." The husband's hand flashed before his mind had time to catch up. A loud crack resounded in the room. Gasp filled the air. One of the wives was holding her cheek, red from the impact of his slap. The silence that hung in the air was crushing. The wives looked at him, their faces white with shock, their eyes wide with incredulity. The fifth wife stood stock still, her hand half raised, as though even she hadn't anticipated this. And in that moment, something was changed forever. The wives were no longer merely betrayed, they were shattered, battered, and joined together in a way that could never be reversed. One of them breathed through her tears, her words barely spoken. "You crossed a line you can never come back from." He attempted to reach for her, his words pleading. "I didn't mean," but she jerked back hard, shaking her head. "Don't touch me, don't you dare touch me again. This isn't what I wanted. I thought love could be enough. But perhaps I was mistaken." Her words did not heal, they merely made the wound deeper. Because whether she liked it or not, the harm had already been done. The wives closed ranks, a wall between him and them. For the first time ever, they were not gazing at him as their husband, they were seeing him as the man who destroyed it all. He attempted to say more, but no one was listening. His words were lost in the silence. The authority he had wielded, the dominance he had held, had been reduced to nothing in an evening. And then the question none of them would speak aloud, yet each of them seethed with: if he could so betray them so far, if he could attack the very women on whose lives they had constructed their own, what else might he do? The evening concluded with slammed doors, stomping footfalls, and stifled weeping behind shut doors. The fifth wife remained at his side, but even she could not protect him from the truth. The wives were no longer merely hurt, they were plotting. And when dawn broke, the house would never be the same. Morning dawned, but peace did not arrive. The house was still, too still, the silence buzzing louder than the sound of noise. Every wife had barricaded herself behind doors the night before, their tears silenced behind the wood, their whispers transmitted through walls that were thin as a reed. But when the sun eventually rose, something had changed. They were no longer wives, they were compatriots, united not by design, but by deception. They stood in the kitchen, white-faced but resolute. No words were necessary. The red scrape on one wife's cheek spoke for all. They murmured softly to each other, voices shaking but firm enough to be listened to. "We can't remain this way," one said, her fingers clinging tightly to a cup she had not drunk. One leaned forward, face intent, jaw set. He hit her. "That's not only betrayal, that's abuse. What's next if we don't stop him?" The third wife, generally unforthcoming, finally spoke. Her tone was even, but there was a new note in it. "We have to be smart. If we go, he wins. He gets to keep her in the house, and we get nothing. But if we don't go, he assumes we'll just roll over." The room was heavy with a silence. Because deep inside, none of them could accept the reality. They were stuck between two impossible decisions. And that's when one wife whispered the thought that would turn everything around. "What if we fight back? Not with rage, but with strength and unity. What if we reclaim the power he believes is his?" Her words fell on dry grass like sparks. The others crept closer, their hearts pounding. For years they had been split, fighting for crumbs of notice. But now the stakes were different. Now it was survival. In another room in the house, the husband sat with the fifth wife. His hands trembled as he poured himself coffee, but his eyes did not look at her. She reached over, touching his hand softly. "They detest me," she whispered. "They'll soften," he mumbled, but his voice lacked substance, as if he didn't even believe himself. She raked her head, yanking away her hand. "No. You don't get it. They're not splitting apart the way you expected. They're coming together, and that's worse." Her words hurt because they were true. He'd always counted on their jealousy, their competition, to keep him in power. But now, the thing he feared most in the world was occurring right in front of him. They were coming together against him. By noon, the wives had already made a pact. No yelling, no threats, just silent agreement. They would no longer compete, they would no longer bend, and they would no longer allow him to control their lives. One wife stated it succinctly, like a promise: "He made his choice, now we make ours." But unity did not take away the hurt. It did not remove the memories of love, or the sacrifice of years, or the children who still regarded him as a father. Those wounds remained open, raw, bleeding with each look in his direction. Later that night, they stood together again and confronted him. All three of them gathered together in the living room. He regarded them wearily, a man trapped by his own error. One wife stood up, her voice firm but icy. "We want everything, not excuses, not half-truths. We want everything." "How long has this been going on?" His lips were shaking as he answered. 5 years. The words hit them like waves. 5 years. 5 years of dinners, holidays, anniversaries, smiles, all while he led a double life in the darkness. The fifth wife looked away, almost ashamed. Almost. The other wife whispered, her eyes brimming with tears, "Do you even know what you've done to us? To the family? To the kids who idolized you?" He attempted to tell them, to spin the story into something less incriminating, but each sentence only buried him further. The wives didn't trust him anymore. The faith was lost. And then the point of breaking. One wife, her voice shaking but firm, spoke up, saying, "If she stays, we leave. All of us, together." The head of the fifth wife jerked up, eyes narrowing. "You think he'll choose you and not me?" she asked quietly, her voice barely mocking. The wives did not reply. They did not have to. The gauntlet hung there, icy and perilous. The face of the husband went white. He glanced at the woman he professed to love, then at the wives he had cheated. His body trembled under the pressure of the ultimatum. And in that instant, every member in the room knew the same cold reality. No matter his decision, the family could never again be whole. The evening concluded without resolution, but an undercurrent of something unavoidable. The wives went to their bedrooms once again, conspiring under their breaths. And the husband, lying next to the fifth wife, awake, felt himself losing grip piece by piece. For tomorrow, the ultimatum would require a response. The next morning arrived heavy, as if the air itself weighed more from what had been spoken the night before. No one hung around the kitchen this time. No small conversation, no clinking of spoons and coffee mugs. Rather, each wife moved quietly, purposefully, as if gearing up for war. The threat loomed in the air like a dark cloud. If she remains, we depart. They had struggled for years for his attention, lived in the shadows of his decisions, borne the weight of a life not of their own making. But now, they spoke as one. And that voice was more powerful than his apologies, more powerful than his remorse, more powerful than the rumors of the fifth wife. He had them avoided him that morning, his footsteps ringing down the hallway as he made his escape outside, alone. He sat on the porch, chin in his hands, looking out at the yard that had once been full of laughter, full of children running barefoot across the lawn. Now even the air seemed haunted. Inside, the wives reunited. Their gazes met, each woman silently posing the same question, would he ever choose her over us? One wife, her voice firm but soft, spoke up. "He won't risk losing us all. Not after everything. Not after the children." Another shook her head. "Don't be so certain, she's different. He looks at her like he used to look at us." The quietest of the three wives finally broke her silence, speaking in slow, biting tones. "If he does pick her, then perhaps that says all we need to know about the kind of man he is." Their agreement was no longer a hollow threat. It was a lifeline to their self-respect, to their future. And in the meantime, the fifth wife observed from the window above. Her look wasn't one of fear, but rather something more sinister. Calculation. She knew what she possessed, and she wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Later, when she found him still pining outside, she slipped beside him, her voice sweet but deadly. "They're bluffing," she whispered. "They'll never leave you. They've created their lives based on you. They don't know who they are without you." Her words cut him like poison, but somewhere deep inside, he wasn't convinced that she was right. For the first time in his life, the wives weren't compromising. They were standing. That night, the showdown. All of them in the same room once more, the air thick with tension that seemed to strangle it. He paced, restless on the floor as the wives sat in an unspoken solidarity on the couch. One of the wives finally spoke for them all. "You owe us an answer. Now, do you want her, or do you want this family?" The question cut through the room like a knife. He stood there, his eyes fixed on them, then on the fifth wife. His lips opened, but nothing came out. She wasn't so slow. "He doesn't have to respond," she said, a bit smug. "His preference is already apparent. If he preferred you, he wouldn't have picked me first." The faces of the wives hardened, their hurt turning into something else. Determination. "He's right," one wife answered. "The fact that he brought you here tells us exactly what he thinks of us. But let him say it out loud. Let him look at us and make the choice himself." The ensuing silence was excruciating. He fidgeted from foot to foot, his hands shaking. The burden of every year, every promise, every vow broken, weighed on him in that moment. His eyes welled up with tears. "I love you all," he managed at last, his voice breaking. But it sounded false. Love no longer cut it. One wife reached forward, her eyes blazing. "Then do something about it, because if she remains under this roof, we don't. And you will lose everything." He faced the fifth wife, seeking strength, seeking clarity from her face. She gazed back at him with cold conviction. Her words struck him like a slap. Enough? Could one love replace a lifetime of bonds, of children, of shared history? Could passion outweigh the weight of family? The room became silent once more, all eyes on him. He was about to open his mouth, the choice on the tip of his tongue. His heart pounded, his chest constricted, and the air disappeared. And then, a knock at the door. Everyone locked up. It wasn't a gentle tap, but a sharp, insistent banging that shook the frame. The wives glared at each other, bewildered. The fifth wife went pale. Even the husband winced, his muscles strained. Who could possibly be at that moment, when everything was already teetering at the edge? The pounding came once again, this time louder, and with it the awful fear that none of them had even whispered aloud. What if this wasn't the end of their lives, but the start of something much worse? The slamming on the door resonated through the living room like a drum beat, each blow racking the walls, each lull heavy with fear. No one stirred at first. The wives sat stiff, their breathing shallow, their gazes flicking from one to the other. The fifth wife gripped her armrest, her face pale, and the husband stood stiff, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to swing open at any moment. The stillness between knocks was torturous. Each second grew longer, each heartbeat amplified. At last, one wife murmured, "Are you waiting for someone?" The husband slowly shook his head. "No, nobody." His voice was little more than a rasp. The pounding resumed, louder, harder, insistent. One of the wives stood up off the couch, her hands shaking as she approached the door. "Wait," another hissed, catching her arm. "You have no idea who it is. Don't open it." Her voice was sharp, but her eyes betrayed the same fear. Because deep down, they all knew, whoever stood on the other side wasn't here for casual reasons. The husband finally stepped forward, his voice shaky but trying to sound firm. "Stay back. I'll handle this." But before he could even reach the handle, a voice cut through the door. Muffled, but unmistakably sharp, commanding. "We know you're in there. Open up." The room hung motionless. The wives shared frightened looks. The fifth wife leaned in, her whisper poisonous in his ear. "Don't open it. Don't you dare." He couldn't help it now. That voice wasn't ordinary. It had weight, power behind it. And the way it rang through the wood conveyed no uncertainty. Someone outside wasn't going to go quietly. He hesitated, his hand suspended over the knob. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. "Who is it?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "No one." Silence, followed by a second deafening knock. The wives' worry escalated into panic. One whispered a prayer under her breath. Another held her chest, while the third gripped the arm of the couch, so hard her knuckles turned white. The fifth wife stood, her expression contorted with rage and terror. "Don't. You don't understand what they're after. They'll destroy everything. Let them go." Her desperation only added to suspicion. One of the wives spun around to face her. "Why are you so scared? Do you know who it is?" The fifth wife winced, her eyes darting, her mouth opening as if she would respond, but she did not. She gazed merely at the husband, her silent appeal to him. The tension became claustrophobic. At last, unable to endure it, one of the wives cried out toward the door. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came quickly, like a knife cutting through the night. "We need to talk. It's about him." All eyes went to the husband. His face went white, his mouth compressed into a tight line. It wasn't a stranger, it was someone who had knowledge. He shook his head wildly, retreating from the door. "No. Don't open it, it's nothing. They'll go away." But it was too late now. The knocking returned, persistent, as though the caller could feel the wavering within. The wives were finished waiting. One of them stepped forward, her legs wobbly, but driven by a flame she hadn't experienced yet. With a deep breath, she touched the knob. The husband sprang towards it. "Don't," but her hand turned the knob anyway. The lock clicked, the door groaned, and the chill night air poured in. For an instant, nobody breathed. And then, as the door opened wide, the figure on the porch appeared. A woman, older, weathered by years, but her eyes blazed with familiarity. She was not a stranger, she was not a neighbor, she was not random at all. She pierced straight through the wives and met the husband's eyes. Her words came low, even and annihilating. "You imagined you were going to keep me hidden for good. But I am through being silent." The fifth wife's face fell in horror. The wives gasped, their world spinning. For the woman at the door was not just anyone. She was the sixth wife. The house fell silent when the sixth wife crossed the threshold, her arrival bringing the house to life like a ghost long gone that had finally come back to reclaim its space. The air was heavy, each intake of breath was thick, each pulse a drum in the silence. The wives gazed at her in shock, their minds whirling. A new wife? How many skeletons had he hidden under the flooring of this household? She didn't flinch under their stares. Instead, she walked in slowly, deliberately, her eyes fixed on the husband, as though no one else existed. "You should have told them," she said quietly, her voice cutting deeper than any scream could have. "You should have been a man for once." The fifth wife's face twisted with fury. She rushed forward, her words like venom. "You're lying, he doesn't know you. Get out." But the sixth wife never even glanced at her. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her purse, frayed at the edges, its ink muted but still readable. She flung it onto the coffee table. The wives leaned forward, their eyes growing wide as they saw what it was: a certificate of marriage. His signature, her signature, affixed and stamped. The husband reeled backward as if slapped. His lips formed words, but he made no sound. His own guilt spilled out in silence. One wife broke first, speaking in a trembling voice full of rage. "Another? You brought another into this family? And you concealed her like she was nothing?" The sixth wife's eyes softened when she gazed at them. "He didn't hide me because I was nothing. He kept me in hiding because I was everything he didn't want you to know. He promised me a life, a family, a future, and then when it got too difficult, he discarded me, like I was something disposable." Her voice broke, and for an instant her pain was raw and undeniable. The fifth wife snarled, her control unraveling. "You're just here to ruin us. He loves me, not you, not them, me." Her words sliced through the room, but instead of driving a wedge, they revealed the truth. Because at that moment, all three wives saw her for what she was. Not a victim, but a threat who had reveled in their suffering. One wife turned on the husband, her voice shaking with both anger and pain. "How many more? How many lies do we have to swallow before you choke on them yourself?" He finally managed to get some words out, but they were desperate, fractured. "I didn't mean for it to be this way. I thought I could keep everything together. I thought if I just..." But he just stopped, because even he knew the words were empty. The sixth wife moved in closer, her eyes shining. "You said I was the last. You said you couldn't live without me, and then you walked away." For her. She jabbed her chin in the direction of the fifth wife, whose face contorted in anger. The wives were shaken, their world crumbling layer by layer. Betrayal was something they were familiar with, but this magnitude of deceit cut deeper than anything they had ever known before. They had constructed lives around him, given up parts of themselves, and now they were in the midst of the remains of deceptions they hadn't even realized were there. The husband slumped into a chair, hiding his face in his hands. "I thought I was supporting the family," he muttered, but no one appeared to hear him anymore. For now the wives were listening to her. The sixth wife, the missing link, the concealed truth. She moved in closer, her voice low but with authority. "You've been living in a house of cards, and I'm here to knock it down." The wives looked at each other, the silent connection between them deepening. Betrayal wasn't enough anymore. This was war. But before anyone could say anything, the little sounds of footsteps from the corridor. A sleepy, disoriented child's voice, calling out, "Mom, what is happening?" The room came to a standstill. The wives' gaze shot toward the door, where one of the kids stood, half opening their eyes. The sixth wife gazed at the child, and her face softened, but the tension didn't release. If anything, it became more acute, because now innocence was in the middle of the crossfire. The husband slowly raised his head, eyes bloodshot, voice a mere whisper. They weren't supposed to know, not like this. And with that, everything fell apart. For because the truth was no longer a whispered rumor hidden in darkness, it was living, standing in the doorway, insisting on being responded to. The child's cry rent the room like a bell, breaking the tenuous silence. All heads were turned toward the door, where a small figure stood gripping a frayed blanket, their hair tousled from sleep. Their wide, innocent eyes darted from the wives to the husband, then to the strange woman standing rigidly by the door. "Who's she?" the child asked, pointing towards the sixth wife. The wives looked at each other in panic. Their natural response was to defend, to shield the children from the mayhem unfolding before their eyes. But there it was, the same question that they themselves were still trying to find an answer to. The lips of the sixth wife parted, but the husband sprang to his feet before she could get a word out. "Go back to bed," he snapped too rapidly, his voice cutting. This isn't for you. But the child refused to move. Their small voice shook, bewildered. Why are you all mad? Why's mom crying? The wives tried to intervene, their voices soft and soothing. One knelt down, opening her arms. Sweetheart, it's late. Come here, we'll talk later. The child hesitated, then patted forward, but their eyes stayed locked on the sixth wife. Kids notice more than adults ever think. And this one had already seen too much. Another child emerged from the top of the stairs, older and sharper, their arms crossed over their chest. We overheard everything, they said bluntly. You lied. You told us we were your entire world. But you've got another wife? Another family? The husband went pale. He staggered down the stairs, his words pleading. No, it isn't like that. I was trying to. The teenager cut him off. Don't. Just don't. We're not stupid. Their voice cracked, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. The wives' hearts broke as they watched. This wasn't just their pain anymore. It was their children's, and that made it unbearable. The sixth wife finally spoke out, her voice shaking but firm. You need to know the truth, all of you. He promised me things too. He built a life with me, just like he did with them. And then he discarded me. The fifth wife snapped, her rage overflowing. Stop it. You don't have any right here. You don't get to taint them against him. But the harm was already done. The kids looked at their father, their faces filled with betrayal. And for the first time, the power he had always wielded over them, the authority, the respect, the delusion of being the protector, it all disintegrated. One wife spoke, her voice breaking. Look at them. Look at what you've done. You've taken the one thing they should have always had, trust, and you've smashed it. The husband dropped to his knees, his face buried in his hands. His sobs filled the room, raw and uncontrollable. But the sound didn't bring sympathy. It only made the silence around him heavier, colder. The oldest child looked to their mothers, eyes brimming with tears. Are we still a family? Or is it over? The question cut through the room. The wives looked at each other, their connection tighter than ever, but their hearts breaking under its weight. Because the truth was, they didn't know. The sixth wife's eyes welled up with tears as she glanced at the children. You are better than this, she said softly. All of you. Her words hung, cutting through the air like a confession, like a warning. The fifth wife's rage could no longer be contained. She lunged at the sixth wife, her voice a scream. You think you can steal them from us? From me? The wives restrained her, their hands locked on her arms, their words insistent. Stop, this isn't the way. The kids held onto each other, eyes wide with fear. The scene tore out of control, emotions crashing into the cramped space, until the walls themselves appeared to tremble with the force of it all. And then, in the hallway, another voice spoke. Steady, silent, but ruinous. It was the oldest daughter, the one who had always been the watcher, the peacemaker. She entered the room, her eyes firm, her tone husky. If you can't decide, she told her father, then we'll decide for you. The room stood still. Every heart missed a beat. The wives stared at her in awe, the children hugged each other closer, and the husband's face turned white, because her words weren't a threat. They were a promise. And for the first time, it wasn't the wives who held the power. It was the children. The eldest daughter's words hung in the air like a final verdict. If you can't choose, then we'll choose for you. The silence that ensued was torture. The husband gazed at her, his lips quivering, his chest convulsing, but no words escaped him. His kids, the very ones he had always said he was doing it all for, were looking at him not with love, but anger, disappointment, and worse, pity. The wives remained motionless, their hearts racing. They had fought each other for years, suffered through his shifting allegiances, bowing under the burden of his vows. But this is not what any of them had anticipated. Their children were coming up, taking a stand in a manner none had anticipated. The eldest daughter moved forward, her eyes keen, unflinching. We deserve better. Mama deserves better. All of them deserve better. You don't get to keep breaking us and claiming it's love. Her voice trembled, but her determination did not. The husband's hands were shaking. He attempted to touch her, but she recoiled from him. No, don't touch me, not until you tell the truth, not until you tell us everything. The wives leaned in, their breaths hanging in their throats. This was no longer about betrayal. It was about exposure. All the lies, all the secrets hidden, all the excuses were going to be pulled out into the open. The sixth wife stood motionless at the periphery of the room, her weight oppressive, her gaze on the children. For a change, she did not resemble the threat. She resembled the proof, the indication of his deception. One of the younger children whispered, tears falling down their face. Daddy, did you ever really love us? The question cut through him like glass. He staggered back into the chair, his shoulders buckling under the weight of it. Of course I did, he croaked. I still do. Everything I did was for this family. Stop lying, the oldest daughter cut in, her voice sharper now, shattering across the room like thunder. You didn't do it for us. You did it for you, because you couldn't stand not getting what you wanted. Her words cut with accuracy, piercing through decades of apologies. The wives sat side by side, a silence of solidarity between them, as they watched their children claim the battle that none of them had been able to fight for themselves. And for the first time, they envisioned a future, one not dictated by him, but by the power of those he had wrongly judged. The fifth wife tried to intervene, her voice sharp, desperate. You're all confused. He loves me. He chose me. This is just bitterness. Don't let them twist the truth. But the eldest daughter turned her gaze on her, unflinching. You knew, didn't you? The fifth wife froze, her lips parting, her body trembling. You knew he had another wife. And you didn't care. You wanted him for yourself so desperately you let us all burn. The accusation exploded in the room. The wives' eyes turned on the fifth wife, betrayal flashing anew on their faces. She stuttered, her defenses crumbling. I thought I'd finally be enough. I didn't know he'd bring her back now. The sixth wife cackled a bitter laugh. Of course you knew. You just wanted to be the one he ruined them for. The wives' solidarity solidified into steel. For the first time, they were not only furious at him, they were furious at her too. The husband buried his face in his hands, swaying back and forth, uttering words no one wished to hear. He was disintegrating, piece by piece, as his family became against him. The oldest daughter's voice cut through again, level but firm. You don't get to make this right with apologies. You've shattered too much. From here on out we determine what comes of this family. Not you. The wives looked at each other, shocked but proud. Their daughter had said what they'd been too scared to say, and said it with no hesitation. But before they could even wrap their heads around it, the youngest child grabbed a mother's arm, whispering urgently, Mom, there's someone outside. The room went still, all eyes turned to the window. And sure enough, through the thin curtains, a shadow danced on the porch. Another figure, waiting, watching. The wives tensed. The husband raised his head slowly, fear accumulating in his eyes. Not again, he breathed. The sixth wife scowled, her tone cutting. Who is it this time? No one replied. The thumping began again, just as it did before. Only this time, it was not frantic. It was intentional. Slow, pulsating. The eldest daughter looked at her father, her tone low and icy. How many more are there? The question hung there, more threatening than anything else. Because at the bottom of things, no one in that house knew they wanted to know the answer. The knocking on the door sounded again, relentless and threatening. The family was motionless, each breath locked in their throats. Nobody had the courage to make a move. The oldest daughter's question still lingered in the air like smoke. How many more are there? The husband slowly stood up, legs unstable, face colorless. His gaze shifted between the window and the door, and back to the children's and wives' faces. They were all regarding him now, no longer with love, no longer with fury either, but with the need for information. He extended a shaking hand to the doorknob, and then hesitated. You don't want to know, he said. The oldest daughter stood. Open it. Now. The silence was deafening, until at last, with a trembling breath, he pushed the door open, and there she was. A woman stood on the porch, no more than 30, hair brushed back, face set not in fear, but in fury. She wasn't broken like the others had been when they came into this family. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't fragile. She was angry. Behind her, a little boy hung on her coat, eyes wide, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. The wives gasped. The mouth of the eldest daughter dropped open. The sixth wife spoke first, her voice as keen as glass. You didn't. The husband fell against the doorframe, his voice cracking. I didn't know she'd come. I didn't know. But the new woman advanced, her gaze fixed on him. You knew enough. You walked out on us. You swore to me I'd never have to set eyes on this house or them, and now here I am, and I am not going anywhere until everyone in here knows what the truth is. The boy squirmed, pulling at her hand. Mom, come on, he whispered. The wives glanced from the boy to the husband, their faces growing horrified. The oldest daughter breathed the words no one else dared. He's your son, isn't he? The husband's silence was enough. The room exploded. The fifth wife rocked back, clapping her hands over her mouth. The others shouted, their voices swelling with disbelief, with anger, with loss. The children shrieked questions, accusations, pleas for understanding. But the new woman didn't blink. She wrapped her fingers tighter around her son's and stepped all the way in. He said you'd never take to me, that you'd all despise me if I came here. But I don't care anymore. My son needs to know where he comes from. And you. She glared at the husband again. You need to lose everything. The older daughter's expression set with a rage even more intense than before. You don't need to worry. He does already. The room trembled with tension. Years of deception had fallen in a matter of minutes. The wives, previously rivals, now sat in unison. The children, previously too fearful to speak, now stood as his biggest accusers. And the man in the middle could do nothing but break down, burying his head in his hands, as his fortress of lies crumbled around him. The boy regarded the eldest daughter, his eyes big and innocent. Are you my sister? He whispered. Her breath caught. She bent down, her eyes filled with tears, and hugged him. Yes, she whispered, and you're better than this mess. The new woman breathed in, her anger lessening just a hair as she saw the boy hugged. For the first time, the room wasn't split. It wasn't wife against wife, child against child, or even family against stranger. It was all of them against him. The husband lurched to standing, his voice rough, shattered. Please don't do this. I can make it right. I can still make it right. The oldest daughter stood tall, her voice slicing like a knife. No, you can't. This ends here. The wives nodded, their determination set. The children huddled near, together, their voices hushed, but their position firm. For once in his life, he was not the center. He was not the leader. He was not the one in control. He was alone. The new woman took her son's hand and walked toward the door. We'll find our own way, she said, with or without you. But don't think for a second you'll ever hide from this again. Not from them. Not from us. Not from yourself. And with that, she was gone. The door closed on her, taking the family into silence heavier than any they had ever experienced. A silence of finality, not of fear. The husband collapsed into the chair, his form hollow, his eyes vacant. The wives surrounded him, the children clutched to them, whispering words of strength and survival. For the first time, their narrative was not his to manipulate. It was theirs. And as the eldest daughter looked around the room, she spoke the words that would define them all. We're not broken, not anymore. The camera of the mind's eye pulls back here, from the shattered man, from the united wives, from the children holding on to hope, and lingers just long enough to leave a question burning in the heart of the viewer. If one man is capable of destroying this much, how great would the healing be when a family is finally able to rise without him?